Alright folks, with the announcement of Daryl Dixon ending at Season 4 and the expectation of Dead City following shortly behind, we found ourselves at a strange nexus point in the Walking Dead universe where, for the first time in years, we really don't know what comes next. When the main show wrapped up and the legacy spin-offs were announced, the franchise was marketed as entering a sort of Phase 2. But with the destruction of the CRM in The Ones Who Lives finale and the lack of real connectivity between shows, there's been this lingering sense of directionlessness that only seems to be deepening. So today, I wanted to explore several potential overarching directions this universe could take going forward and weigh the pros and cons of each possibility. But with that, if you end up enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button and drop a sub to catch more content like this in the future. Starting out with probably one of the more dramatic possibilities, the idea of a second apocalypse first came into conversation during the airing of The Ones Who Lives finale, where Major General Beale revealed to Rick that intelligence has indicated humanity may only have a total of 14 years left to live before the entire planet is overwhelmed by the dead. Walker herds have grown to sizes of 1 million plus all over the continent, and while humanity has grown better at dealing with them over time, it isn't just the walkers' destructive power that's threatening the progress that's been made, as disease and famine are just as likely to bring entire colonies to their knees. Each new day carries the risk of a walker transmitting something incurable to the living, or even worse, evolving into something even more dangerous. And given these undead masses are cesspools for bugs and rot, you can only imagine the environmental damage they would cause beyond the standard trampling of crops, as the scavenging insects they carry could destroy entire ecosystems and spread disease all the same. Beale's goal was to wipe out every other super colony across America in order to preserve their resources for this alleged doomsday. However, Rick and Michonne would disrupt their plans and exterminate every soldier attempting to carry these orders out before helping to reform the CRM into a benevolent force, which could actually speed up this ticking clock if the projections were true. Many fans believe Beale was simply lying in order to scare initiates into loyalty, but with Dead City introducing the idea of widespread crop failure across the South due to pests, perhaps these are the first warning signs of something terrible coming for the Walking Dead universe once again, which could completely shake up the status quo. Now, what are the pros to approaching the future of the franchise this way? Well, it would absolutely bring stakes back into this universe, as you can now have an enemy that seems unstoppable without having to actually introduce a new villain, as the dead have been largely sidelined in recent years in favor of human threats. Repetition is a big issue with the Walking Dead universe, and while the world ending again is admittedly a retread, this would be one hell of a way to bring all these disconnected stories together, as everyone would need to work together to prevent this upcoming extinction event. For example, this could be an interesting way to bring back characters such as Hope and her father from World Beyond in a new show, who were researching how to speed up the decomposition process within walkers. Alternatively, perhaps the Super Walker serum created in France could be used to turn the dead against one another on a massive scale. Nothing brings people together quite like a shared sense of inevitable doom. So if the franchise were to go down this direction, we could finally move past the typical cycle of human-on-human conflict and focus on utilizing the knowledge and skills acquired throughout the years to stop the world from ending again. This direction could also open the door for a more survival-based story, as food once again becomes scarce, and would set up a natural path for the story to go forward, as our characters will either succeed and prosper as one, or fail and die all the same. Personally, I'd be pretty disappointed if Beale was straight up lying, given how many people died because of it. So overall, I'd be okay with this direction, but you can't ignore the cons that could come with it. For one, this could be seen as a bleak path, as the Walking Dead universe's second half has been about rebuilding society. So if these super colonies were to fall, it could feel like the progress made over the years was all for nothing. I also worry it could box the writers into exclusively telling bombastic stories with little character substance. The Walking Dead was so successful because of how personal the stories felt to the characters. So if you go too big too fast, it's very likely you'll lose that sense of personability. Multiple different stories building to the same conclusion can work, although for this particular idea, I think the less shows running simultaneously the better, so if AMC ever wants to do The Ones Who Live Season 2, I think this could be a viable story given it would follow up on what was revealed during the Echelon briefing, with maybe 1 or 2 limited series complementing the conflict through a different perspective. Who knows, maybe this could be the time for a Eugene spin-off to shine. Regardless of what happens, the idea of a second apocalypse could bring both the biggest risk and biggest reward for the franchise. On one hand, it brings direction, stakes, and a unifying purpose to the various stories, but also threatens to undo years of narrative progress by bringing the universe back into a state of chaos. If done well, this could be an emotional and action-packed direction to take, but if handled poorly, could wind up as a spectacle piece with little character substance. Now, this is a concept that has been played with periodically for years, yet still hasn't really gotten the time in the spotlight that it deserves. Variants were first officially featured towards the end of Season 11 through Climbers in a way that appeared as a tease for what was to come in the sequel spin-offs. But the deeper we've gotten into this era of the universe, the more these evolved walkers have been treated as gimmicks rather than a shift in the way survivors approach the dead fundamentally. It's a simple concept, but effective as hell. Have the virus mutate based on specific circumstances or experimentation. Daryl Dixon and Dead City have toyed with these ideas, but it basically amounted to a chase sequence and boss fight when they could have been the main focus and draw of the shows, which is actually beneficial for AMC as this could open the door for new protagonists to take the spotlight without having to rely on the big six to bring viewers in, as these variants would be the main draw. This isn't to say we would have to retire these characters, but it would allow the franchise to actually expand with new faces to grow attached to. The idea of walkers growing in size and fusing together or with nature seems like a natural direction to me, becoming giant behemoths capable of single-handedly leveling small communities like an even grosser version of the Walker King. Or maybe they're naturally learning to hunt and coordinate while adapting to their environments, similar to what we see with the Climber variants, just even further developed, forcing survivors to adapt their defenses accordingly, as walls would no longer be enough to stop the dead. Hell, I'd even watch a show surrounding a cult-like group of survivors worshipping a variant like a god. Regardless of the concepts they come up with, this is another direction that I believe could reignite interest in the franchise. Unlike the idea of a second apocalypse, this concept could reintroduce walkers as the ultimate threat without destroying the progress that's been built throughout the super colonies while providing a new way to interconnect the individual stories. They could return the horror The Walking Dead's been missing for years while expanding their storytelling possibilities, as experimentation could lead to new ethical dilemmas. Take Laurent's alleged immunity, for example. If that rumor were to get out in America, who's to say a group of CRM scientists wouldn't sacrifice and experiment on him out of desperation to prevent the dead's evolution, only to discover he wasn't actually immune after all? This particular approach would probably lend itself to the most potential spin-offs, specials, and limited series if they were planning on continuing indefinitely, as the concept of walkers changing and growing stronger is a gold mine for stories that can share themes, but still remain independent when necessary. It doesn't really set up an endgame, but it gives this hypothetical Phase 3 a consistent overarching theme and thread. Although, admittedly, this direction does carry the risk of turning the universe into a monster of the week type narrative, which could become repetitive or tonally inconsistent with the rest of the franchise. Like most concepts, it all comes down to execution. We could either get a highly introspective story on what it means to interfere or fight with nature, or a simple viewer-grabbing gimmick, as variants have pretty much been treated for the last few years. But I'm curious to hear if you think this concept would be enough to carry the franchise forward. Now, another possible direction for the franchise to take is to essentially catch up to the ending of the comics, which saw a multi-year time jump with society mostly returning to peace, while continuing on with the children of our legacy characters featuring as the protagonists, which, if I'm being honest, probably feels like the most likely approach that will become a reality. With this concept, you could end most of the stories currently dragging on their own terms while providing a new jumping on point for first-time viewers, which could be beneficial given we are approaching the 27th season of Walking Dead content. Not a reboot, but a new start. You could easily make a grown-up Judith or even RJ the protagonist of this series, with characters like Gracie and Herschel acting as the supporting cast, and even feature our legacy characters throughout its run, similar to how The Legend of Korra periodically featured the previous show's protagonists through various arcs. It would essentially be like starting again with one show at the beginning, but in a version of this world we need to refamiliarize ourselves with, which could eventually open the door to new spin-offs set in this era. I think there is an audience for this concept, but I also wonder what it is you could do to maintain interest if most of America is already in relatively stable condition. Shows like Dead City feel fundamentally off because it doesn't make sense for our characters to be in the wasteland when so many developed societies exist now. So I fear characters like Judith would be forced into dangerous situations through convoluted means or repeated stories like the kidnapping of a loved one. So perhaps this could be a great avenue to focus on variants, which could give this era a distinct identity. It's kind of funny because a time jump of this nature was actually the original ending for the main series. We were supposed to see a grown-up version of the kids we know on the highway leading towards Atlanta, attempting to rescue survivors in their parents' footsteps. They even filmed it and everything, but eventually cut it. Probably because it boxed them in narratively when so many other spin-offs were yet to air. And although I'm not going to show the image of the alternate ending here, as I'm not entirely sure if that's something AMC actually wanted out and don't want to risk getting this video taken down, you can easily search it up for yourself and see a lot of work would need to be done to give this type of show its own identity, as the actors they got just look like they're cosplaying their parents, which could be avoided by giving survivors in this era a distinct aesthetic through clothes and weaponry for their time. Whether that's a more primitive look or more advanced, like the CRM, would be up to the writer's discretion. I think this is a direction they will eventually take, but I personally don't think it's the right time to do it now. It seems more like something you do 5 or so years after the current stories have concluded and the dust has settled. But given Rick and Michonne have already gotten a decently satisfying ending with the others potentially following suit, you wouldn't even really need to have a big unified event beforehand to pull this off, as again, you could just feature all our favorites periodically throughout the series in the years following their own personal conclusions. AMC doesn't like to take long breaks when it comes to the Walking Dead universe, however, so starting up this next generation series soon is a valid option that could happen and would provide a new starting point for first-time viewers, although could risk alienating fans who don't click with this new direction. But if they could execute it in a way that feels natural and provides something new to the franchise, I'd be willing to give it a shot. Now, this may seem like a bit of a cop-out for the last segment, but I think it's a valid option for AMC to take soon, as everything does eventually need an ending. What people miss is seeing all our characters together, and now that these individual spin-offs are winding down and our big six have mostly run their course, this is the perfect time to create one final 12-episode limited series that gives the Walking Dead universe a proper conclusion. And there are so many different avenues to explore through this direction. A Cure storyline, the return of the old world government, a foreign war or conflict. Hell, you could even utilize the second apocalypse idea here, just in a more limited format rather than building up to it over multiple shows. The possibilities for a final arc in the Walking Dead universe are endless, but personally, whatever story they'd go with, I'd like to see a narrative that concludes with our remaining survivors properly reclaiming and restoring America. If they were to go down this direction, I'd use the remaining seasons of Dead City and Daryl Dixon to properly set up key contributions for stabilizing society. The Ones Who Live already took out the boogeyman of the wasteland and made America interconnected. Dead City could expand the Walker methane concept to power the country through cleaning up and recycling corpses, and Daryl Dixon could set up communications and trade with the outside world, with Daryl and Carol acting as European liaisons. Regardless of the story they choose to explore for the final conflict, this would need to be a character-focused narrative, as our survivors need proper endings. And if we were to go down this direction in conquering the dead and properly rebuilding society, then I'd like to see the following endings for the Big Six. Maggie return to her role as leader and eventually follow her comic storyline in becoming president, while Negan finally meets his end, preferably at the hands of Herschel, as that plot point has been set up and played out for years now. Carol and Daryl should have happy endings, like Judith has said in the past. Although, I'd like for them to come to the conclusion traveling across the country on Daryl's bike while cleaning up the world for the next generation is what makes them happy, as they set off to continue living their nomadic lifestyles off-screen. Like an open ending that tells you they will continue to be themselves and look out for each other's safety until the day they die, as freedom is what they've both always been chasing. And for Rick and Michonne, well, it's easy to say Rick should die at the very end of the series to mirror his comic fate. But if I'm being honest, this family has really been through enough. Rick has only just returned to his family after years of hoping and fighting, so to kill either him or Michonne would feel like nothing good will ever come to our survivors or the fans who just want to see these characters happy. So in this hypothetical ending, I'd like to see the last scene of The Walking Dead feature the comic's final multi-decade time jump, while referencing its story by showing off an adult Judith holding her son Carl's hand as she walks up to a lone farmhouse, where an old man Rick and Grandma Michonne sit on their porch before greeting their family as the sun sets behind them. Imagine this in slow motion with Judith doing a final voiceover, similar to Carl telling Andrea Jr. the story of The Walking Dead in the comic as the sun beams towards the camera, making Michonne and Rick appear as silhouettes before revealing their old smiling faces as we fade to black. An ending that calls back to Rick and Carl's Season 8 flashback and references the farmhouse from the comics. For me, this type of ending would almost make it feel like all the missteps the show took were alright in the end. Instead of losing Rick and Andrea with Carl honoring their legacy as we see in the comic, we'd leave off with only the loss of Carl in the Grimes family as the rest continue to honor his legacy all the same. I know a lot of people don't want this franchise to end, as it's something many of us have stuck with for over a decade. But I truly think this is the best direction they could take. Give us fans a great final story, bringing all the characters we love together, and leave no question that the survivors will live the rest of their lives in peace. The only real con I can think for ending the franchise is the simple fact that we won't get any more The Walking Dead. But like I said, nothing ever lasts forever, and if it does, there's no way it can consistently maintain its quality while running indefinitely, so despite how much I love The Walking Dead, I do personally think this is the best direction for the universe to take. Even if they wanted to do the next generation idea years after this conclusion, at least us long-term fans would have a proper ending to the characters we've followed for so long. But with that, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about everything we've discussed today. Would you want future spin-offs to have the hypothetical second apocalypse as their overarching threat? Would you prefer variants take the spotlight and usher new characters into the fold? Do you want to see this current era wrap up and restart with a next generation series? Or do you want to see the Walking Dead universe go out on a high note with one more unified project? No matter what direction they decide to take, I think we can all agree this franchise needs a new sense of connectivity. So if you have suggestions for alternative directions for the Walking Dead universe to go down, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. But that is gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.